Welcome everyone to the new Spatial Realities and to the Households, the Unruly book with Raising the Roof and Voices of Experience, which is part of this year's Architecture Fringe core program events. Just a note, meeting is being recorded and there's also live captioning available at the bottom where you find a button noted as CC. So I'm going to ask all the speakers to kind of speak clearly so we're able to use that as well. A little bit about the running order. I'm going to do a little introduction just now into what Architecture Fringe, New Spatial Realities, and the Households project is all about. Then we're going to screen some short films and have a lovely discussion with our speakers. And at the end, we're going to have a Q&A led by Raising the Roof and Voices of Experience. So Architecture Fringe is a grassroots volunteer-led community interest company based in Scotland that explores architecture and design in the social, political and cultural context. With 58 projects and events across Scotland and online, this 5th edition of the festival responds to the provocation of unlearning, where you are invited to interrogate your own behaviors and biases to acknowledge how the world really is, and then to reimagine how it could be. New Spatial Realities represents the next iteration of our ongoing New Typologies program of commissioned work. In 2017, we had teams reimagining the civic infrastructure. In 2018, we had Frankentypes, where the teams explored the hybrid building typologies. And in 2019 Retypes, we invited the contributors to consider the adaptive reuse of redundant building types in the light of societal change and the climate emergency. As part of a core program this year, which is a little bit different, this June, the New Spatial Realities is a research and design project which invites participants to view the existing urban fabric from their own perspective and pursue a line of research and interrogation in response to their own experiences of our shared spaces. We have invited 4 teams: Civic Soup, Migrant Bureau, Numa Studio, and a joint team of Raising the Roof and Voices of Experience. And we, in the light of the pandemic and our provocation of unlearning, we asked the teams to explore how we identify and define space. How does the space express social negotiations, ownership, access, community, aesthetics, materials, and so many more things. So Civic Soup explored the wet spaces and what kind of relationship we have with them. Numa Studio were questioning and sort of exploring the unlearning of play. Migrants Bureau worked with food landscapes of Bristol. And today we have Raising the Roof and Voices of Experience with their Households, the Unruly book project. Raising the Roof is Adele Patrick, Sue John, and Janice Parker. And they are a collective of Scottish-based creatives exploring the themes of later living in the context of care home culture. We had Raising the Roof working on a project in 2019 Fringe titled Home at Last. And this year, Raising the Roof have teamed up with Voices of Experience, a collaborative project by architects Suzanne Ewing, Jude Barber, and Nicola McLachlan that celebrates the female presence in architecture and built environment and facilitates dialogues between experienced creatives and those at the start of their careers. I'm now going to hand over to Jude and all our lovely speakers for further introductions, and enjoy the talk.
Thank you, Ruta. Thank you very much. And thank you everyone for coming on this lovely Friday to our event, and to Archifringe again for hosting us. It's just been a pleasure. We're delighted to be part of this programme to explore Raising the Roof's project, their ambition, and explore how we might all as well within this, live our better lives as we get older. And so we've developed the Unruly book together as part of the Archie Fringe, and that draws very much on personal reflections from the Raising Roof team, and also from some of our Voice of Experience participants as well. So those mainly are Anne Duff, Dorothy Bell, and Joyce Deans, and you'll hear those within the films as well. And what the project's really done as well has really highlighted the acute need actually for quality housing and open space, particularly for people in the older years, and readjusting our expectations towards what a household might be and what we prioritise within society. So this book They're films, digital films at the moment, but they will be in the form of a book going forward. But for now, they're digital films, and they're deliberately not a design guide. Instead, it could be described as a collective reimagining of how we might design with and for specific groups and places, and with a real focus on sharing, agency, and autonomy. So, what we'd like to do is just start by showing the introductory film, which kind of sets the scene for today's discussion. So, thank you.
Just sort of like things that are never going anywhere. This is actually about putting them in a book now, and it actually being something that you could actually talk to other people about and imagine, and then find out what's in their books and what they've been thinking about and what their visions are.
I don't want a site where it's only housing for old people and nothing else on it.
Great, thank you. So, I'd just like to say I'll be your host for today, and what we're going to be doing is having a conversation with Adele, Patrick. I don't know if you want to give us a wave, Adele. Janice Parker, and Sue John, all the Raising the Roof team, and also Nicola McLachlan and Suzanne Ewing are also here from Voices of Experience. So yeah, I'd just like to start really by just asking the Raising the Roof team, could you just tell us a bit about the motivations that you had for setting up Raising the Roof?
Janice, do you remember that moment, the moment in Cove Park? I don't know if you want to sort of describe the setting and how this idea germinated for us.
Absolutely. Adele and I were at an artist dinner at Cove Park, which is an artist retreat. And we knew each other, but hadn't really had conversations in a sense that went about work. And I think that time and space just liberated other conversations. And Adele started talking to me about her vision for the future as she was growing older, and that literally the hairs on the back of my neck started to stand up because I heard Adele talking my words, and I had to stop you, Adele, and say, hang on a minute, have we had this conversation before? And you went, no. And immediately there was just a sense of shared values, an immediate sense of trust, and we shook on it that night, and we said, okay, let's make a 5-year plan and let's work on this. And that was the beginning.
Exactly, and I think that from that simple idea, I know that we're going to go on today to talk a little bit about commoning and about how maybe that idea about really such a radical truth telling about what we need and what we want is something really complex and really specific to groups of people getting together. And what I'm really appreciating in this phase of our work together, and thinking back to how this got sort of developed at Architecture Fringe last time, is how maybe working with architects and working with others, and specifically the voice of experience of elders for the project, has started to sort of concretise this vision in a really, really palpable type of way. And I know that for myself, I'd had a few sort of passes at trying to sort of get to rooting a vision in architectural terms and 4 walls and take root. And this is almost like Janice, Sue and I really sort of giving it one more go at sort of trying to realise something that we're hoping will be both a household for ourselves, a new neighbourhood, a way of thinking about a vision, concretising a vision for the future, but also with ArchiFringe and with Voice of Experience, we've had a chance to sort of have that conversation in public. So that's why we're so excited to be with everyone today, to sort of say, this is what we're doing. As Jude's saying, this is not about a template or a blueprint for others. This is about what happens when people start thinking about a vision, decide that that is really going to be a reality, and we sort of put this 5-year sort of bracket around it, but also sort of knowing that out there the precarity is not, it's not just our own, this is sort of something that is shared by very many people. You know, what does the future hold as we live our older lives, and what could it be?
Great. Thank you very much. And again, you know, back in March 2020, just as we all sort of found ourselves in the pandemic, Voice of Experience sent out the sketchbook, this pack, quite sort of quiet project where we were sort of inspired by your vision and your work, and sent this out to the participants of Voice Experience and yourselves, and really invited kind of reflections and ideas in response to your kind of original brief. And I just wondered if you could talk about receiving and working with those just over the past year, and yeah, just a little bit more about that would be great.
For me, it was a real we've talked about concretizing things, grounding plans. It was that moment where I felt connected and supported and doing something alongside other people at the same time. And I, you know, my home is full of notebooks. I had notebooks about what I wanted in my older life, why I wanted it, what really mattered, what was motivating me. And it was just that moment to pull it together and lay it out in something that felt, it felt very real, it felt very precious. And also to have that connection with Voices of Experience, so another level and of thinking in the world, and what that brought to our thinking, it just felt really precious and important for me anyway at that moment. And this is some of my writing that's on the screen. I ended up, I thought I would have pictures and images, but I just felt there was so many words I wanted to say. So my whole book is words and writing, and my own thoughts and pulling in from other places and spaces as well.
And this is a step on really from the chapbooks that we made with the first ArchiFringe sort of space that ArchiFringe gave us. And I suppose that we have to say, Jude, also that for me, this was sort of like it became an unexpected source of optimism and hope where I desperately, desperately needed it, because they arrived just as COVID impacted. And I suppose this context where we're making these books that are giving us a hope for the future and making a vision for the future are occurring, where all the key themes that we'd thought about to begin with around care home culture and a response to that around aging and a response to that around health and well-being could not have been put in a more vivid sort of spotlight. So obviously, I mentioned in a tweet recently about an article in The Conversation of how COVID has exposed systemic ageism across Britain. So 88% of the COVID deaths have been people aged 65 and over. All this sort of cultural misrepresentation of older people that I know Janice has been really acutely, you know, making me very much more aware of through this long, beautiful discussion that we've been having, but really literal things like pension poverty that, you know, we're talking about. I remember a conversation with you, Jude, Suzanne and Nicola, that was about this, about pension poverty and about precarity and so on, and how that's been really put into a spotlight as well. So, and again, this backdrop of the dismantling of the welfare system, this idea of almost like the collateral damage being okay, of older people dying through the pandemic, that it's almost like the government unmoved by hundreds of thousands of people dying. And also sort of like the reports that we've been logging as well, that 84% of care homes are really poorly run by private providers. So I suppose that is the backdrop to these beautiful books, that were a lifeline to sort of thinking through that and how we could actually realise something that might have value for us, of course, but for this wider debate that was unfurling as we were writing them and making them.
Yeah, and just to add to that, there was something about permission to think big and dream big, to not hold back on anything. This was that opportunity to just really go to what we would call ideal, which actually, why can't we have what's ideal? Why can't we aspire to that as we get older and at any point in our lives?
I think that's a really nice thing that comes through in that one of the films, and you say, we're not asking for much, these are just things, these are really important things that everyone should have in their life, So let's shall we move to the first film, where there are 5 themes, and we're not going to show all films, but we're going to show maybe 2 or 3 so we can just have a conversation around those. And the first is contributing and stewarding. So if we could just go to that film now, that'd be great.
These old people, they don't want to sit at home and do nothing. They want an enterprise to keep them busy. They're both stiff in these care homes. These poor old souls are bored.
Institutions, it's just a name that annoys me. Home, because it isn't a home. It's a place you've never been to before. You don't know anybody and you have people telling you what to do. I mean, there are rules and regulations. It's not a home, it's a place.
For me, it's a reminder of how you've got a responsibility if you're building something to bring joy to others if they're walking, or inspirational.
It's also got to do with control. You don't really think about it in your life. You do what you want within the parameters of normal life. You choose what you do, and then a home is one you choose.
The other thing for me is how to maintain agency and autonomy as I go into my older life, and not losing that unless I choose to. That might be a choice to not hold the same agency.
A home is under your control, roughly speaking. It isn't totally, but it is, and it is your choice, and it is where you have chosen to live, and how you have chosen to live.
So, yeah, contributing and stewarding. I mean, we see in each of the 5 scenes within the Unruly book, it begins with the kind of what we see as a status quo in society and how we design and how we develop. And I think in this one, in the student computing, it starts with the kind of traditional boardroom, the man looking over the kind of development of the city and towers and everything. And then that's replaced with this, that sort of dissolves and becomes this kind of alternative imagined scene of feminist decision making and action. could you talk a little bit about why collective decision making and mutual financial models are so key to your future kind of living proposals, particularly, as you move in your road of life? I mean, you've touched on that a bit already, Adele, in the first bit, but if you could expand on that, that'd be great.
Yeah, Sue, I don't know, I'd love to hear your voice too, because you're such a key person in this conversation. Do you want to start on discussions about collective decision making and the sort of commons models that we've been talking about?
Yeah, I think, I suppose, as Janice outlined earlier, we were already coming from a position where we had a shared vision of something, and that was a real kind of catalyst. So I suppose when we talk about kind of collective decision making, it makes the process sound more formal actually than it has been between the three of us in raising the roof, so I wouldn't want anybody to think that we're a kind of purist collective model, but what we always have had is definitely consensus. We definitely knew that we were small scale, that we had already kind of identified what we felt we wanted as individuals as a starting point, and that together we were able to, I think, quite easily and naturally develop those needs into our collective vision with quite a lot of agreement actually. And I think we obviously communication and honesty and being frank but understanding what our individual needs and how collectively we can envisage living together, I think to me felt quite an easy place to navigate to in terms of a position. And I think Architecture Fringe in 2019 really helped us to formulate that, where we were able to identify the questions that we wanted to ask that have been already up on the screen. So what do we want? What do we need to know? Who can help make it happen? What could radical mean? What else is happening? Why now? All these questions I think were identified jointly with us, and we made these kind of chapbooks in our residency at the Lighthouse in Architecture Fringe 2019, and lots of people were kind of coming forward and helping us to kind of formulate ideas and visions, and we were able to fill our chapbooks with really precious and valuable things. So some of this, I mean, I've given my life to kind of feminist decision making and action, so for me it's the kind of default position, and feminism is political, and what we're doing here is political. Housing is political, care is, health is, ageism and structural inequalities are political issues. So I suppose that for me kind of underpins everything around what Raising the Roof is doing.
I think the combination of like women and commoning activities, I know that Janice has sort of like really brought again like loads of new thinking to the table for me, but also Jude in particular sort of like brokered a discussion that we were able to have with Commoners Co-op in November of 2020, and that was a really critical moment for us in terms of like moving forward with this project into its new phase. So Commoners Co-op are a group of designers and community activists who I think one of the sort of like stuck areas for us were the sort of existing models of rent and private ownership in terms of housing, and Commoners Co-op really allowed for us to start to think about, well, what could a feminist model of a financial model be in this context? So looking at those two moribund stuck sort of models, and looking forward to sort of how maybe you might look at a loan stock mutual home ownership scheme, how we could sort of really envisage affordable home ownership for people at different capital and income levels. So this sort of convergence of feminist ways of thinking, and also sort of reading things around like Dona Petrescu's work, where she's looking at what women's commoning activities are, and they converge, they mapped over what was in our chapbooks. So gardening, cooking, composting, hosting, creating, looking at how women in particular sort of host and develop neighbourhoods through ethics of care. all of this is really relevant, but looking at the ways that architects facilitate that process. And I think that's what's been happening in this phase, you know, like the generosity and the hosting of Voices of Experience has been absolutely and utterly critical to us taking this to the next level, and actually sort of thinking about one of the conversations that Voice of Experience sort of had with us was really, really critical, where we're saying, let's imagine it's happening. And I feel like, as Janice is saying, in the scrapbooks, it was almost like that shift to this is actually happening now. It's not just a vision, it's actually something that is taking place in real time.
Yeah, no. What we'll do now is just to, when you talk about visioning and designing, I think one of the next key themes is sharing and making space, because I think the reason the 5 themes, you know, find their way into the book is because designers, we can design so many things for you, but unless we get those structural things like the financial modeling, the place modeling, to, you know, together, these things need to weave together. But I think one of the key themes was sharing and making space. So I think it'd be quite good for us to watch that film now and then have a little discussion around that if we can.
It's the general thinking that I would like to influence. Once you get the community thinking on a different line, then you get the places. Architecture becomes from the thinking of the people. The brief becomes from what people want.
This house has played the game with me, because whenever I've changed something, it's changed quite happily. Build a house, but don't make it that size. Make it less, because it'll be cheaper. Somehow or another, persuade people that no, the space is more important from a health point of view. And open outdoor space is, to me, absolutely vital. Absolutely vital.
The aspects of my own space that I appreciate, like the things that, as we were talking there about how maybe you adapt to contexts and you compromise, or you do this, that, and the other, but you change your environment through your imagination type of thing. And I think it made me think about a future and a vision of a future, but also sort of like trying to sort of like appreciate a bit more the things that I wouldn't want to lose, if I was sort of shifting.
So the environmental footprint is really important, that it's at the cutting edge of all of that, and the climate crisis, a response to that there's adaptability in it, so it's future-proof for growing older and not having to leave, that it's part of a community and a neighbourhood, and that there's connection in that. And I was thinking as well of the communality of it, and commoning, and the importance of that as a principle and a value, as a way of living, and a place to be supported and belong, feel you belong there. I've got stuff of my parents and things that really matter to me, and I just have a sense of, wow, I don't want to pack them away in crates and bottom trunks. Surely this is the time that they can all be out in life and have breath around them and space around them. And I would love that. I would love to have a place for everything that's in reach and out and visible and can be moved about, and you know, the way we all make beautiful installations on surfaces of objects that we love. That kind of space would be really, really important to me.
Yeah, there's a lot in that one, I think. And we also, I think to a degree, it sometimes ties with the rooting and interdependence as well. So we're not showing that film, but you can see that on the website as well, for those of you that want to do that after the event. But I think what's interesting about the sharing and making space theme is it's, you know, the contributors refer a lot to that kind of, well, particularly Janice as well, you mentioned as well about commonality. And another theme is adaptation as well around that. And you know, you can see in the first image, you know, it's about this kind of almost these like homes that are just boxes that are formulaic. You know, what we're hearing here from yourselves, which isn't something else about adaptation and relationship to open space. But when we think about commonality and commoning, you also talk a lot about personal space and the need to inhabit that too. And there's that kind of tension between those two things. So that comes across really strongly, and you know, particularly to move it into our older lives. Why is that commonality and that personal, that tension, why does that become so important, do you think?
Oh, space and the politics of space and taking up space and porosity and liminal space and edges and fluidity of edges. These are things I think about a lot. Commonality for me is a number of things. It's a place of safety, a place of connection and belonging. It's about sharing resources. We're living in a time when we really need to be sharing resources with each other, but also with our communities. So there's a porosity there and a commoning there. And I just think this relational way of living is just part of the human condition. And we really need to bring it to the surface right now. I think we need it to survive. I also think about, people often say, well, where do you want to live when you grow old? And I used to think about that a lot. And then I think it was certainly after we met and had our conversation, Adele, and then so the three of us all talking, I thought it's not about where, it's about who do I want alongside me. That's what really matters. Who are my neighbours? Who can I connect with and belong to? Who will take care? We will take care of each other. And these boundaries are, or that way of interconnection is really important to me. But equally, talking for myself, I'm a totally quiet HSP introvert. I do not want to spend my older life doing big communal activities all the time. I love and need solitude, absolutely thrive on it. So that sense of having private space is really important as well. And I totally don't think the two things are mutually exclusive. They're not contradictory. It's not either or, it's both and. So I think to have that sense of privacy in one's own space whilst belonging and connecting at the same time just is a kind of ideal way of living.
And Sue, you're nodding there, is it?
Yeah, absolutely. And well, no surprise that we kind of agree, really. And I think, certainly, gosh, over the years, and particularly over kind of COVID period and lockdown, I know that I've learned so much more about myself and my needs and what I like, what I love, what I don't like. So, I think all the things that we share a love of as individuals, so green space and light and privacy and I'm quite tidy, are quite, are things that I've learned that that's a way I really want to live. But then, as Janice said, we share a desire for shared resources, but you know, things like we're dancers and we love music and we love parties, you know, so the three of us kind of, I think, have a vision where why shouldn't we have space where we can do that as well. But you know, I think the idea of, I agree with Janice actually, you know, the kind of individual and the collective, they don't have to be mutually exclusive, but I think, you know, kind of when on my multiple state sanctioned walks around neighborhoods and everything, what we see all the time is a kind of default of, you know, everybody has their kind of little boundary mapped with a fence or a privet around the kind of box of a house. And that's kind of what we have as a housing model. And I just feel like there's so much more to explore in terms of how we live and what is missing around commonality and community and choice and yeah, you know, how we use our spaces. So hopefully, you know, Raising the Roof is something where we explore those kind of the ways that there's no, that they aren't necessarily mutually exclusive.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think we're just about to watch our last film of the Really Unruly book, which is around the theme of taking time and care. And I think the opening image that you see here is kind of the status quo image, I think, is sort of the antithesis of what you've just been talking about here. So we could watch that one now. I think that would be good.
It's a form of spatial segregation, and that actually took my breath away of, oh my God, we actually do shut people away and segregate them from everybody else because they're too old and sick.
What we have to build up is a public perception. Change the public perception of what an old person is. Town and Gown used to say, it's bringing the town in, not isolating the poor souls, you know. I hate this isolation. The care homes are isolated places.
I hate all this getting old business. I don't mind getting old in itself, but I hate all the stuff that goes with it.
I thought about the children and the old people, you know, because it's the reversion. It's the reversion of the curve. You know, a child grows up, an old person grows old. And everybody's very fussy about children and how you help them. But nobody's very fussy about old people and how you help them.
We always, whenever people are in a care home, it's always in a home. We never say they're at home. And again, if you go into a care home, you're not allowed any of it, except 6 photos on the wall. And that's heartbreaking for me to think that. Unless you really want that. Some people really don't want their stuff around them. Slight regular pause in the motion of a machine. And I thought, wow, that's a beautiful metaphor for living one's older life. A regular pause in the motion of a machine. And the other thing that's really important to me is thinking of my home as a space to die in, and what's a good death, and what that, I'm not totally sure what that means, except that I did write somewhere else in my book, maybe I'd like to die under a tree with the stars. I quite like that choice. Why not? We never think of that.
Okay, we're just going to have a very short discussion before we go to Q&A. I just had one more question for you all actually, which is just, when we think about this taking care, I think what comes across is in your books and in some of the other films as well, it's not just taking care of oneself, but the community, our planet, each other, and that being so vital, and also the connection to outdoor space as well. And there's also in the other film, Testing Limits, there's reference to like stargazing, and you talk there, Janice, about dying, and there's a kind of frankness about what you might do or what you want to do. So it was just really, can you sort of expand on that in the context of you talk a lot about the care home model, and the other participants do too, and some thoughts around that. But I just wonder if you could expand a little bit on that sense of, how you might take care of yourself, or how you might live within that that space, and how you might take care going forward.
Well, we all talk about this a lot, and I think in a really good way, the whole society is talking about this at the moment because of what's been really exposed through the pandemic, and we do spatially segregate our old people. And I think we all knew that, but when I saw these words written, it really did take my breath away. And we do that, and we thought that was okay somehow, or we certainly allowed it to happen. So there's something, the reversal of that for me is, well, how do we take up space? How do we start to occupy space, as well as how do we share space? And what kind of spaces do we want to live in as we as the final place of our life? And we also don't talk about dying. So
yeah, I thought it was interesting because Anne's talking a lot about the fussing around the start of life, and then it's just this sort of, actually we can't, we're not going to look or deal with the end of life.
And so how do we want to die? And just thinking of aging is constantly about decline. The thinking about aging is constantly about decline and deficit and less, and all the perceptions and stereotypes and stigmas that we don't place any value in growing older. And I think, yeah, we lose lots of things, but by definition, because we lose things, we gain other things, and let's value the things that we gain. And I would love, I keep thinking my own personal mantra is I want to be able to say, bring it on, bring it on, bring this aging state on. And so much of that for me is about where we live, who we live with, how we live, what's available to us, what choices we have, and really start to reverse that whole stigma of aging. 1 in 2 of us are ageist. The World Health Organization have just done a big report, and that's a shocking statistic. And part of that is risk. We're not allowed to take any risks, which means we don't have any agency and autonomy. And again, so much of that is our economics and what we value in life. And it's as you said earlier, Sue, it's all politics. It's just all politics, and starting to shift all these cogs together at the same time.
Do you want to expand on that bit or add anything? Or shall we move to Q&A? I think there's some really interesting comments coming through. So Nicola's going to take us through some of the Q&A. I know we've got another sort of 10, 15 minutes. Is that okay, Rusha? We can, because we also have some questions about what's next, but let's go to the audience first.
Yeah, there's some questions and some interesting conversations kind of going on at the side here, and some good links and things. So I think we can probably save this conversation, can we?
Yes.
Andy, but I've copied some things over. Will I just read out questions that have been there and ask you, or can the audience read that? Yeah. So Robin's talking about, he's really interested in how, Robin Webster, how he's interested in that it started in Cove Park, and the kind of model there between, private and then communal space. Is quite interested in that connection.
And also, for those who don't know, Cove Park is an incredible kind of residency centre in the Rosyth Peninsula, where creative people can go to share, to develop their work, to think and to share ideas. So, and it does really, like, having been there and spent time there, I know exactly what you mean, Robin. It really does foster that sense of being part of a bigger whole, but you still have your own space and ability to retreat within it. I think it's, and also your practice did a beautiful extension to that as well. So I should mention that too.
Oh, which won a GIA award.
Ah, yes.
Well, the question Robin asks then is, have you considered how we deal basically with older people when your mental ability fails as well as your physical?
I really appreciated seeing this question coming up, Robin. Thank you so much. And I just wanted to say something about back to that sort of idea of how that architectural space actually triggered this and helped germinate this idea. It was actually Janice and I, as Janice is sort of describing, you know, the conversation starting, but almost like how we were looking around the space and saying, wouldn't it be wonderful to wake up in a space where you could move and dance like this, you know? So the actual physical, the architectural sort of space germinated this discussion, which was really great. But I suppose one of the things that we've been talking about over the last wee while is the costs, the economic costs of the status quo, that it doesn't make sense to have individuals who are experiencing dementia, who are experiencing mobility difficulties, who are experiencing some of the things that do happen to some people in older age, and how this sort of atomized way of living, this high cost way of living is unsustainable in the longer term. And as Janice says, you know, that's just been accelerated. That's the sort of like the inadequacies of the current system have been shown up to be costly in all respects. And I suppose we were thinking about things like what happens when you have some almost like those liminal spaces that we were talking about there, extend that to sort of think about, well, how might you have others that might care for us as well as caring for each other, and what might be the exchange there? I know that Veronica put something in there about let schemes and so on and so forth, but how you could almost like have some spaces within your, as it were, small micro neighborhood that could allow for people to come in at certain times, this adapting space where in exchange for what elders might share with you and space to live in for a period of time, maybe the ways that caring happens in other communities we know about globally could actually be thought about in our space, you know, that doesn't involve somebody going into one of the things that I think we all had that visceral reaction to when we showed that serried ranks of high back chairs. You know, that could there be other ways that others might join with our community at certain points to care for us in particular ways, whether that's the type of care that people need as they have dementia or other disabilities. So I suppose that we're really interested in those types of conversations. How do we care for each other and how others might care for us, but not within institutional settings, but in the home setting? Janice, I don't know if you've got more to say about that.
I think as well, it's the conversation is what's really important. It's not to be afraid of it. It's in fact to expect it and anticipate it. We are all aging. We are all going to change. We're supposed to change. And if we talk about it now and expect it and anticipate it and not be afraid of it, and because I think that happens a lot, we're afraid of it and we deny it. So suddenly it's there. And we haven't built something around us that we need. And we're talking about it now and thinking about how can we accommodate that? How can we make that work for us if that happens? And it will happen. Yeah.
Thank you. I want to try and frame a conversation that, or a comment that Helena said, and I think it would be good to frame it in context with the Architecture Fringe theme this year of unlearning. Because Helena said, I don't want to die in one of those awful high back chairs. And it is such a kind of strong visual when you see Helena say that, you can picture it. And I think in terms of Architecture Fringe and unlearning, and we've discussed a lot about societal norms and sort of what society just generally accepts.
and how we need to unlearn these things. And I wonder if we can talk a little bit about the importance of unlearning to actually move forward. We have to sort of do that.
I suppose the education that's happening within the architecture schools, also this sort of siloed thinking that has characterised almost like government, local government and national government thinking, I think is radically shifting. You know, it has to shift. So I think that there's some unlearning there, and I feel like certainly working with Voices of Experience, our learning from the older women who are involved in that project, you know, they are literally people who have got loads and loads of, as it were, professional knowledge, but they're also learning as individuals as they are aging. They are sort of bringing all their lived experience into the mix there. But I think at the type of text that I was talking about earlier on, like Joanna Petresco's work, I feel like the architects that we've been working with in this project and the learning that Architecture Fringe is sort of helping to sort of facilitate is almost like looking at architecture in a slightly different way, that we are centered in this process. You know, that is a revolutionary thing, to actually have those who are being housed centered in this process, and the architects bringing their skills and learning, sort of like listening to that is I don't know why that should be radical, but it represents an unlearning process that architects are going through and sort of shedding expectations about them. I mean, I know that Jude shared something really significant about expectations that there might be about housing the elderly, that might in the past not that things like that older people bike, you know, and like biking, you know, is like a revolutionary thought, that architects might put that accommodation into spaces where older people are, you know, that I feel like this is the type of fundamental thinking that needs to be unlearned and changed.
I mean, I had an example just last week. We were looking at housing for older people, and I said to the client, well, we'll need to put bike store in. They're like, no, why would we do that? It's like, I know incredible women that seem to be featured in the film that cycle. My neighbour Beverly, you know, cycles everywhere, and you know, it shows it's possible. It's not always easy, but it shows that it's possible, and we need to actually work with this as a possibility, not as a challenge. And I think that's the difference, you know. In our day-to-day lives as architects, we're constantly, you know, it's limiting, it's getting ever more limiting, actually, in terms of the briefs that we're being given and the expectations that are being.
Just to pick up another sort of thread, because there's some interesting things, really interesting coming in the chat. And I think Pete Smith, and it also connects to, I think, something else, which is about thinking about the extended household.
Yeah.
And I think that's a really interesting question, just to sort of offer that, and just to sort of, I suppose, from our sort of perspective, the name isn't an accident. I think this last year, and questioning that norm and the limit of a single person or a two-person household, and not really unpacking it, has kind of come to the fore. But I wondered if Janice, Sue, or Adele would like to say anything about the idea of what an extended household model might be. What does that mean in terms of different generations? You've made some really fantastic points about that sense of, Janice was talking about edges and relational dimensions.
I think that, sorry, there might be others that want to speak to this as well, but I know that Nicola and the team had some really wonderful discussions about, you know, like thinking about Siegel method and thinking about some of the ideas that maybe Matrix were talking about, you know, 40 years ago, you know, about the way that spaces can evolve and adapt and grow and so on and so forth is absolutely central to the way that we've been thinking. But I think it's very sobering that, you know, when we're involved in Women in Profile, all that time ago in 1990, when we brought Matrix to Glasgow, that this passage of time has to elapse before there's any sort of like traction on some of these ideas. And I think we're beyond impatient now for change. And I think that those ideas about extended family were things that I know that in the Jackanory project and in other projects that Matrix were involved in, was sort of shifting those assumptions about heteronormative ways of living and the ways that people really live in the world. I suppose it's why with Raising the Roof we are saying we are an idiosyncratic small project, and it's the chemistry of all of us that's evolving here, but we're not saying that it is a blueprint for others. We're saying it's a conversation we want others to pick up and evolve their own specific ways of living. It's about the complexities of people, rather than saying it's like this is a formularized way of working. And again, that feels like quite a lot of unlearning that has to happen there in terms of the different sectors that we're talking about here, whether it's housing, the care home culture, architecture, and so on. So I don't know if
I think also just to add just another dimension was that the participants, the older voices that you heard in the films, I think we've learned a huge amount in this project just about their experiences of changed households and extended households. They all have idiosyncratic, really interesting, inventive models, either of living with other members of the family or at different times for longer periods, and what that means. So we've got Jude's been putting things in the chat about
frozen.
I think we might have lost Suzanne. I just want to, oops, sorry, Kate's had her hand up and Cam said she would spotlight her to ask the question, just so we can try and get as many questions in here as we can. Is that all right, Kate?
Yeah, that's fine. I'm not muted, am I? No. I'd like to draw your attention to a community in Genoa, which holds something like a world record for longevity. The secret of it is reckoned to be that it's a very stable community, and the aging in Italy is not regarded as with dread. Rather, the old person is treasured as a great fount of wisdom. Of course, it's the women who live the longer, and so these elderly women are not short of connections, and their offspring or family come and visit them once a week at least. And the terrain that they're in is not flat. They have to climb quite steep hills to go and visit each other, which of course is a jolly good thing. I've designed a number of projects for the elderly when I was in East Sussex, which has a very high retirement population. So I have spoken with people in social services who are responsible for this sort of thing. And I'm convinced that one of the major causes of mental decay is simply boredom and isolation and loneliness. So it's really important to maintain, to feel you still have a stake in society and across generations. And of course, COVID has made that progressively more and more difficult, but that's my contribution.
Oh, thank you, Kate. And I think that's one of the, it's just so wonderful to hear that and to read, you know, with evidencing that through research as well. Some of the things that have actually come through in the conversations participants about, you know, why shouldn't I? You know, Dorothy talks about she climbs up to a ladder to her bed every night. And people say to her, why are you doing that? You know, when you could just bring your bed down. She's like, no, I want to enjoy staying the same upstairs and downstairs. So, you know, this is sort of the opposite of what we're told.
Yes, I live on 3 floors.
Yeah. So
I don't climb ladders, but
but you know, isn't this wonderful to hear that? So thank you very much. And that, oh, actually, there's a link in, I think Veronica Lowe's kindly put the link to the Genoa project. So thank you, Kate, for that. So I'm just conscious of time. I think it's maybe we should be coming to an end now. I think what we'd like to do to end is firstly, if just some closing words from yourselves, just a few words, Adele, Sue, and Janice, maybe a little bit about what's next and where you see this going very quickly. And then we're just going to show one last film, which is throughout the pandemic, Janice has been doing these incredible dances. And as part of the Unruly book, under each of the 5 themes, there will be a dance for each of these themes that Janice has done, and we're going to watch one of her beautiful pieces at the end.
Jude, just one comment. The Raising the Roof team have agreed to reply to the questions that they didn't get to.
Brilliant.
So we will collate these and then hopefully have your emails via Archifringe, or we can speak to Andy and the team about how to get their replies to you. But thank you for all of them. And
that's brilliant, because again, the point of this project, one thing we love about the New Realities project and the ask from the Archifringe teams about this being an ongoing research project. So all your contributions and all your questions and all your links and everything, that is all going to be feed into this continuing work. So Adele, Sue, Janice, any last words?
Just to say thank you to everybody for putting wonderful things in the chat room and for brilliant questions, and to Voices of Experience and Archifringe for absolutely incredible, inspirational work and hosting. And just to sort of say, just in terms of, we are really keen to look now at this literal process of modelling the financial model that I mentioned. We are in dialogue with Commoners Co-op. We want to pick up that conversation in the next phase and to try and take steps to help pioneer a model in Glasgow. That's what we'd really like, and to literally be building this vision over the next wee while. We're determined to do that. But really thank you to Voices of Experience and Archifringe for making it feel real.
Yeah, definitely. I echo that obviously as well. And I think from me, that there are lots of kind of groups and discussions now that are around, conversations about post-COVID recovery and the impact on communities. I was at one yesterday, organised by the University of Glasgow and the Centre for Population Health, and the conversations are important, and of course in COVID, older people have been and care home culture have been kind of central to that, to the whole pandemic. But now's the time. We're not policymakers. We have questions. We've answered the questions as far as we can in terms of vision and opening up maybe what potential might be, but we're not the policymakers. So we do need people to step in who can now. The Scottish Government, we can make an incredible new thing happen in Scotland, and I think that's my ask now. Who can step forward and make this happen, create a model that can then be the basis of other models, some of which have been kind of highlighted today. And how exciting would that be? But how needed is it? That's the point.
Yeah, there's a lovely comment in the chat there from Nikki Emery saying that this discussion is actually provoking younger people and thinking how they might want to live differently too. So I think this is really important. Janice?
Just echoing what everybody's saying, a big thank you. I think what we're doing is responding to the issues of our time, and that it's about making things real and concrete and connecting outside. So this opportunity to connect to more people who are thinking in similar ways is a really important part of how we go next. How we go next, where we go next. So thank you, everybody.
Fantastic. Thank you, everyone. And so we're just going to end. We're just going to show the film, and then you could all please just get on with your day. And thank you so much for joining us. It's been lovely and really insightful comments and contributions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was brilliant. Just wanted to thank Raising the Roof and Voices of Experience for the project and for today and for the talk. It's a really important subject we're covering, and it's so important to have this conversation. Keep an eye on the website. The Unruly book is currently in development, and we're going to keep you updated on that. Give a follow to all our contributors to Architecture Fringe. Follow us on social media. Thanks all the sponsors and supporters who makes this all happen. You can support Architecture Fringe also on Patreon. You can find it on our website. And once again, thank you so much for today, and have a lovely rest of the day. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Bye.